Welcome. Allow yourself to begin to settle and arrive. We will begin in 1 minute. You have joined Awakening. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We are about to begin Awakening, Torah, Mussar Mindfulness, our weekly practice together where we learn Torah through the lens of Mussar Mindfulness. And we always take the weekly parsha from yesterday, from Shabbat, that has just passed, where we traditionally study the Torah portion. And for us this week, we enter a new book of the 5 books of Moshe, of the Torah, called Shemot, Exodus. And I'm just delighted to have you here. I am Rabbi Chasya Steinbauer, the founder and director of Machon de Kedusha, the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar. And we always begin with our intention for this practice, for the kavanah of why we are doing what we're doing, why we are joining in community to do this practice together. So I am going to share screen with you. For those of you listening on audio, I will read out loud what is before us, and this is what we do every week together. So you will see before you, Bezrat Hashem, 3 kavanot, 3 intentions. We always do the first and the last. So this, we see this practice that we do on Sundays, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as an act of self-care to really allow ourselves to be into character development of our midot, of our soul traits. And so we say this is our intention, our kavanah, together. This is something that I am doing to strengthen my own soul in order to be of benefit to others in the future. The last one is our relationship with God, with the divine, however we may encounter or have that relationship or not. We say together now, this is something I'm doing to strengthen my relationship with the Creator so that I can be a better conduit of God's good to others when they need me. So with a deep breath, as a gift from God, we allow that intention to enter and also come out with the out breath. That is what we are here to do together. So as I said, we're going to enter Shemot. And I'm deeply grateful to enter this new book together, this new Sidra, Shemot in Shemot. It's a Shechianu moment. It's a thanking God for bringing us to this moment. So we'll say together, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. We thank you for bringing us to this moment, to be able to be in community, to learn from the Torah and Mussar Mindfulness, to grow as people in service of others. So Shemot, so much happens in Shemot. We can't cover it all, obviously. But I do want you to recall that back in Vayechi, back in Bereshit, the Sefer, the last Torah portion, we witnessed, and even before Vayechi, we witnessed Yosef as this vizier, this second in charge of all of Egypt, taking on social policy to get not only the Egyptians, but basically the whole region, but especially the Egyptians, through a famine that lasted 7 years. And that policy, as you'll notice, went in stages. It went from having them give money for the bread and the grain, to when they ran out of money, giving their livestock and their animals, whatever they might own, for grain and bread, to finally giving their land, and then finally their bodies, essentially becoming indentured servants. And this is something that they went in willingly, not out of naivete, but because they needed to survive. There's no judgment there. We just want to be aware and analyze what happened. And Yosef really probably has a certain skill set, a toolbox in front of him, is modeling what to do based on what he's witnessed around him already in this culture. So although we have the vantage point of looking back and perhaps even judging, thinking, not such a good idea to have social policy where you turn the whole population into, except for the priests, of course, who don't get their land taken away, but to turn the whole population into indentured servants, and essentially as slaves to Paro, to the office of Paro, of the Pharaoh, and that the Pharaoh should then own all their land, and then basically anything they produce, they have to give a certain percentage to. I believe it's 20%. So you've set up now this social policy and this new way of being where it's not the best setup. It's what's needed in an emergency moment of this famine. But then I want to also remind you that Yosef brings down his family from the land of Canaan into the land of Goshen in Egypt, where they are given the best land in order to shepherd and care for both the Pharaoh's livestock and their own. This is a community that is thriving in the famine. This is a community that actually is reproducing during the famine. It's growing where no one else is. And you know from how things are today that when there is a group of people who actually aren't native citizens, native to the land, that they're doing really well and everyone else is suffering the famine, this is not the best foundation and setup for what is and what will come. So this is where we are in Shemot. A new king, a new emperor, a new Paro, a new Pharaoh comes to power. And who lo yada et Yosef. He doesn't know Yosef. Okay? I want you to hold on to that term, yada, to know, because it's not like the way we know things often in Western culture, where there's this concept of I know a fact. So I'll share briefly with you from this wonderful text and source. The JPS Torah commentary is a wonderful resource. And on page 5 here, we read, know that this is the first appearance in Exodus, in Shemot, of this verb, Yud Daled Ayin. And it's a key term in the Exodus narratives, occurring over 20 times in the first 14 chapters. The usual rendering to know hardly does justice to the richness of its Semitic range. In the biblical conception, like with our ancestors, what we're witnessing right now, knowledge is not essentially or even primarily rooted in the intellect and mental activity. Rather, it is more experiential and is embedded in the emotions and the embodied sense, so that it may encompass such qualities as contact, intimacy, concern, relatedness, mutuality. Conversely, not to know, when you say lo yadati, or I don't know someone, or I didn't know this situation, not to know is synonymous with disassociation, with indifference, annihilation, estrangement. Okay, it culminates in a callous disregard for another's humanity. So here we have this king saying, it doesn't know Yosef. Okay, that's the first. Yosef, our ancestor, and all his people. So this, when you don't know, is that you don't have rachamim, compassion, where you see and know the needs of the other and bear their burden. You have no interest in that. And so we see this king acting out of fear-based leadership, There's no wise discernment going on, and there's a prejudice. It gets taken out on a group of people and on our ancestors, on the emerging Israel community, the Hebrews, the Jews. And it starts with trying to crush their spirits with hard labor, so that the goal is to stop the reproduction. They have grown so much that they are a threat to this king. The king is choosing to see them as a threat because they're a large population. When basically they are put into conscripted labor against their will, they're not being paid. It's simply, again, a form of indentured servitude, form of slavery. It's meant to crush their spirit so that they'll stop reproducing. Well, that's not effective. It actually doesn't work as social policy. They continue to reproduce. So the Pharaoh moves from leadership to the populace. First, he begins with the midwives. There's a beautiful story in here. If you have a chance to study this parsha, I recommend that you do. There's the assumption that all of us have engaged in this when we come together. So here we have these midwives named Shifra and Pu'ah. And they are given in social policy instructions by the parvo, by the king, that they must murder any Hebrew baby boy that is born. So right when the child is born and comes out, what they call birth stool, they're supposed to check if it's a male or female and murder the baby boy. These two women decide, no, they're not going to do this. They have what we call ometz lev, an amazing amount of courage. And what is the foundation of that courage? What actually helps balance their midah of courage that allows them to act out this compassion in this way? It is that they fear God. That is the language used, that they feared God and they did not engage in infanticide to kill these children. So you may be wondering yourself, what does it mean to fear God back then? Of course, in our Jewish tradition, there are many opinions and probably not one precise definition, but you should know that their defiance of this tyranny, of this directive by the Paro is the first recorded act of civil disobedience. And they really decide to defend a moral imperative. And when we say that there's a fear of God, it's associated with moral and ethical behavior, meaning it connotes a conception of God as one who makes moral demands on us. And it functions as the ultimate restraint on evil on one side, and the supreme stimulus to do good, to do what is upright. It is what we today also would say is wise discernment of living that upright path, on the path toward holiness, kedusha. It's living with integrity. So these two women, these two midwives, so the term in the Hebrew is lo asu, they decided not to act, but they do even more than that. They techayena et hayeledim, okay, et tinokim. They sustain, they bring life to these boys. So it's not just that they refrain from murdering, they decide to sustain these children and perhaps even the mother or mothers. So they're acting out, there's a compassion, a balanced compassion to see these mothers and these children, and also have this real balance of yirah, of awe and fear of God, to understand the moral imperative and to live it, and having balanced courage in the process. So we're seeing the birth in Shemot of people who have this moral impulse. It's there, the fire is there, We don't see any rule of law. So these are people that are having to act individually. And so you get the next impulse after this amazing act of civil disobedience, that they're actually even willing to die because they could have been killed by the leader and the king. That we see this, the Paro is not, satisfied that this is it in the end. He decides to do another measure of social policy to add to that infanticide that didn't happen through the midwives. And he calls upon all citizens, all Egyptians to murder the Hebrew baby boys, to throw them into the Nile. So it's interesting that you see this birth of a new form of genocide and evil on a grand scale, and also the birth of the vigilante, of that's one coming with that impulse of the fear of God and the balance of morality, who's going to attempt to fight this and overthrow it. And of course, which will come later, and we'll learn this, comes the relationship with God, and where the rule of law will come. So this vigilante justice, when there's no rule of law, where one has to rely on one's own internal compass, which they use and is termed as fear of God. So that one remembers, okay? So one remembers what is required of them, that they are to act. It's not just an awareness. So I want to point out, we meet Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses in English. He is one of the Hebrew boys who isn't murdered, who is saved, again, by women who, with clear kavanot, clear intention, putting their life at risk, attempting to save this boy, mother, sister, and then the daughter of Paro. Even her servants who are witnessing this, they also participate. They are all the foundation and the cradling and the holding of keeping this child alive. He emerges as this young man who goes to see his brethren. You have to be very careful how we pay attention to the verbs that are used here. Simultaneously, while he went out, he purposely goes out to see his brethren, and he sees. You have God who is coming, who hears the cries, who remembers, who sees. This is all the yada, the knowing, is coming alive and balancing. And it leads to great rachmanut, compassion, that one acts with zerizut, a balance, alacrity, enthusiasm. You can have that fire and act out and have great ideas, but the follow through is what has to be developed as a practice to have balance, zerizut, balance, enthusiasm. So we see this young man who went out. He sees an Egyptian murdering an Israelite, a slave, and he murders the Egyptian. He flees because he feels that he's going to be caught for that behavior, flees to another land, again sees a group of women, shepherds, trying to get to a well to water their flock. They are being treated poorly by the other male shepherds there. He intervenes again. This is someone who is extremely, has a strong distaste and intolerance for injustice. So much so for these individual level, on the small local level, when he sees that injustice, the impulse is so strong, he acts out. And what we witness here is that when he comes into relationship with God later in chapter 3, in 3.1, where he experiences this burning bush and speaks those beautiful words of Hineni, here I am, meaning here I am to serve. He you get to see and really learn where his curriculum is, where this Moshe Rabbeinu, where Moses is going to need to have to grow to expand his window of tolerance. He's someone that can respond to individual acts of injustice. But when he's called upon by God to go on the global level, to go save a people, his own people, he's like, whoa, fear emerges. And a lack of proper balanced humility. He is low self-worth. He feels, I am not the person for the job. I cannot speak well. He gets into a dialogue, an argument with God, where it's this sense of, I can't do this. And Hashem, God's response is, I will be with you. You think that would be enough? But it's not. It's not. So hold on to these, because you might want to look at, when we finally move into our guided sit and meditation together, is it enough for you to feel that God will be with you? And if it's not, just to recognize it and honor it, because it wasn't enough for Moshe. And then we move to this ongoing dialogue now in chapter 4:1. It goes all the way through chapter 3 into chapter 4, where Moshe argues again, I'm not the person for the job. I can't do this. And then God says, let me show you these miracles. You'll have this staff that turns into a snake. You'll have this whiteness, this what we call leprosy, but it's not really leprosy, break out in his chest and then go away. This sense of using miracles to cause faith, trust in God, and courage to act. So this didn't work so well either. It won't work so well for the Israelites either. So by chapter 4, pasuk 10, verse 10, Moshe has finally moved to aversion. He's like, no way, I am not the person for this job. And, God tries this kind of God-centered approach as a responsive. Well, who's the God? Who's the person, in a sense, who gives speech, who enables? And this doesn't work for Moshe either. Finally, in 4:11, God loses God's patience. There is anger there. Is not bearing the burden, but immediately balances that, contains it. There's self-restraint there. And says, Aharon, your brother, who is 3 years older, is coming to support you, and he will be the one that speaks. And that is what causes balance in Moshe. That is what strengthens his humility to take up the proper amount of space. We in Mussar see anava as humility, as taking up the proper amount of space. And it's only through the support of another human being, and perhaps a family member too, but another human being, that gives him the strength that he can move forward and do what's called upon him to do. Let's hold that and keep that in mind when we move into our practice. I'm just going to close by saying that this concept of remembering, so we're taught here that God remembers, that God knows too. God Yada knows what's going on, hears it, remembers, sees it. There is this unfolding of Rahmanut, of this divine compassion in addition to the human compassion, and feeling others' pain. We defined both in the Dharma, but also in Mussar Mindfulness, this feeling someone else's reality, identifying with the need of the other person, bearing the burden of them, really taking action to assist. So this is what we learn about to remember. The shoresh, the stem, the root of Zayin Chaf Reish, it connotes much more than just recalling something in the past. Like when we say today in English, I remember, this is not the same thing. It means to be mindful, to pay heed. There's a sharp focusing of attention on someone or something. It embraces concern and involvement. It is active. It is not passive. And it basically leads to action. So we're finding these midot are all coming together in Shemot that have been building in our ancestors, that they've been strengthening over time or being challenged by over time of their own spiritual curriculum of what they needed to work on and strengthen. And so we see that we are the balanced humility, the balanced compassion has to be there, of really seeing oneself in the other, trying to relieve suffering, wanting to acting, and then having that courage, and then the follow through of zerizut, of the alacrity, of enthusiasm, all these wonderful midot that we will work on, have our mindfulness of, to balance and strengthen, so that we too can move and extend and strengthen our window of tolerance to move from individual acts of bringing justice to the global level, which is what is needed right now through climate change and this pandemic. It is where we need to work in community and strategize to be able to act on a larger level. So I will just close with that by saying that this is all contrasted with leadership, with Paro, with the Pharaoh in Egypt, which this is the second one now, it's already changed, who lo yada, who he does not know. So the first one didn't know Yosef, and now this one doesn't know God. Who lo yada. He has no compassion. We're on the chapter 5, verse 2. His reaction is, I don't know this God that you're talking about. And that not knowing, that intimacy, is meaning that he doesn't have a fear of God. He doesn't have that moral internal compass. And so we see him with this new order that he even adds more suffering to the Israelites and to the slaves, of that they now will not be able to have straw, but they're required to produce the same quota. So I'll close with saying that when Moshe finally is with Aharon in his brother, before Paro, and Paro will not agree to let them go serve their God and worship their God, Moshe sees the added suffering that this Paro is causing, but sees it as God causing also, because he, for the first time, argues and shows his disappointment and speaks, this is where his low self-esteem, his low self-worth is located, in his mouth, in his speech, that which is oral. He says, and I feel like this might be like God actually setting up an opportunity for Moshe to practice and develop his speech, to strengthen his midah of anava, of humility, to strengthen his speech skills, his argumentation skills, his courage. It might be even balancing his strong will to act physically, like killing the Egyptian, moving the rock, and helping the shepherdesses gain the water that they need, and shooing away physically the other ones. He's very much choleric. He's very much that which is embodied and does with his body, to God helping him develop also speech, so that he need not be always acting with that justice, that impulse with his body and through physically to others. So we see in chapter 5, Pasuk 22, verse 22, that he argues with God. He's like, why did you have me go before Paro and tell him to let us go do this? And now he's causing more demands on the slaves that is just hurting them. And you're not helping them. And why have you sent me to do this? And it's in a sense, he complains. And God, this is when God says, you will see. There's a scene, you will see. It's time. This is unfolding. So with that, we are going to see. We are going to practice a compassion, loving kindness, metta practice in our Dharma and Mussar Mindfulness tradition. And so I want you to find a comfortable position. If you need to stand because you have chronic pain issues or just too strong of discomfort where it actually takes you out of the present moment, please stand, secure yourself next to a seat so that you are held and contained. For those of you who need to lie down, please give yourself permission to do so. Keep the eyes open so you remain awake and alert. For the rest of us, you want to come to a seated position, upright, yet comfortable. And allow your hands to rest. If you feel safe, close your eyes. If you need to keep them open, just lower your gaze. Ground your feet to the ground so that you are carried and held. 3 deep cleansing breaths. I will guide you with my voice and instruction. You will notice your breath and attempt to stay in the present moment. As the practice of mindfulness, your thoughts will wander from time to time. Perhaps it's even sensations in the body that will carry you away, planning for the future or thinking about the past. Just know that this is part of the practice. You simply begin again, bringing yourself to the present moment. Your breath is your anchor. If the breath is difficult for you, then allowing my voice to be your anchor or any sounds around you. The key to our practice of Mussar mindfulness is just that. It's a practice. It is one where you'll want to practice each day. As you know, the more you practice something, it becomes habituated, it becomes a habit. Neurons that fire together wire together. So if we practice the habit of loving kindness and of compassion, those qualities, those midot, become more the place that we live from. They become more balanced. So even if it seems forced for you that are new to this practice of who you are, change happens little by little. Instead of forcing something or trying to make it happen, we simply incline our mind and our body in that direction. Just having it as an intention, as a kavanah of something that we intend to bring, starts the process. And that's what we've begun today and will continue to do. I encourage you to sit with this daily. It requires patience and commitment. And this is why we have the Kehilat, the community, the Vad, the Sangha, to support us in our practice. And we begin with a compassion practice, a metta practice of chesed, loving kindness toward ourselves, and then toward others. May you be held in compassion. The traditional form of this practice is that we combine a repeated inner intention with visualization, with the evoking of feeling of compassion. We begin by feeling the life that flows within us, the gift of breath. We feel the treasure of our own life. And we also feel how much we guard ourselves in the face of our own sorrows. We'll begin by bringing to mind someone close to you whom you dearly love. Picture them. Feel your natural caring for them. Notice how you hold them in your heart. Allow yourself to be aware of their measure of sorrows, their suffering in their life. Feel your heart open to wish them well, to extend comfort, to share in their pain, to meet it, bearing the burden with compassion. Inwardly, you will recite the following phrases after me. May you be held in compassion. May your pain and sorrow be eased. May your heart be at peace. Breathing in their suffering and breathing out compassion. Out with compassion. Now we will visualize and imagine that our beloved one turns to us with their compassionate gaze, acknowledges within us the sorrows that we carry, and they say to us with the same tenderness, repeat after me, may you be held in compassion. May your pain and sorrow be eased. May you be at peace. As they breathe in your suffering and breathe out compassion, allow that compassion to enter you and touch your very felt sense, the embodied sense. Feeling how strong and balanced it is in within you, strengthening your own self-worth, knowing that you are seen, that somebody, Yada, knows you, that deep in your tukas, in your deep in your stomach and your heart knows you and acts from that knowing. And you them. This is what Moshe felt when he saw his brethren being beaten and killed by the Egyptian. Almost as if he couldn't contain himself. We will watch how our beloved ancestor Moshe will be one in his own spiritual curriculum, will have to grow towards the rule of law with his impulse towards compassion and justice. And now, as we strengthen and balance our own self-worth, knowing that we are created in the image of God, we direct that same compassion towards ourselves individually. You will repeat after me. May I be held in compassion. May my pain and sorrow be eased. May I be at peace. You can whisper inside yourself, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom. That sense that you are dignified, created in the image of God, coupled with your chesed, your metta of loving kindness, rachmaniyut, of compassion. Together they will strengthen your courage, your ometz lev. Where you will act with wise discernment, growing your wisdom, growing your window of tolerance, to act on behalf of others, on humanity, on the earth. This week in our practice, as we sit now heading into some moments of silence, you will practice further and extend this circle, these concentric circles of obligation to the suffering of your friends, to your neighbors, to your community, to all who suffer, even to difficult people, to your enemies, to all beings. Taking this practice one day at a time until we meet again, Bezrat Hashem, God willing, next Sunday. We move into silence, having awareness of your felt sense of this experience in your metta, loving kindness, compassion, chesed, rachamim practice. I will ring the bells when we will come out to join again in community. We began today's practice with our kavanot, with our intention to engage in practice and learning together so that we could strengthen our own spirits and soul, so that we can be of benefit to others, to strengthen our relationship with God, to be a conduit to bring God's good to others. Slowly and gently open your eyes. Meet us back in this shared Zoom room, live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for being with us to practice Mussar Mindfulness as we explore the Torah and our teachings, the Dharma together, to grow, to be able to serve others. Today's teaching is sponsored by Debbie Hoffman, who has sustained this Institute for Holiness with her tzedakah, with her righteousness and giving of truma, of charity, in the form of sponsorship, which we welcome from everyone and anyone who wants to honor the teaching in memory of someone who has passed, where we can merit our teaching to raise up their soul and also to help others in need today. And you can also do it in memory of someone, in honor of someone. So Debbie has given the sponsorship in honor of me as the founder and director of the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar. Thank you, Debbie. You help sustain us so that we can bring God's good to others. We also, of course, accept dana, truma, donations of any amount through any method you can think of, usually PayPal, Zally for those who are abroad. In Israel, we have Paybacks, and the other one, my mind just flew out. Any amount will be full of my gratitude on behalf of the Institute to help us continue to make this free will offering to you weekly. And may this help sustain you as it does as we take refuge in community together, in the teachings, in God, and with the teacher and with the Buddha wisdom. I thank you. I look forward to seeing you next week on Sunday, B'ezrat Hashem. Please do be in touch with any questions or let us know how your practice is going. Thank you. Shalom, shalom, shalom.